And we would very much like to find out where you're streaming in from. So please, in the chats, introduce yourself, maybe put your city, your state, the traditional lands that you are watching all of this from. We want to welcome you, but before we do and go on into the introductions of our fantastic panel, we want to first give our thanks and our gratitude for the land that our university is situated on and the original peoples of this land. And so Project Humanities, we want to acknowledge that our institution, Arizona State University, is situated on the ancestral lands of Indigenous people, past, present, and future. We thank and we honor the Native American tribes and sovereign nations of the Salt River Valley. These are the Akimel O'odham, the Anakimel O'odham, the Pipash nations, whose stewardship of the land and the waterways, very important in a desert, allows us to be here now. In addition, we very much support and celebrate their continued and many contributions today. You know, land acknowledgements are just a very small thing that we can do as something of sense of gratitude. And so we want to encourage you to find out who are the original peoples of the lands that you're on, and also to get to know the 22 recognized tribes here in Arizona. We have so many wonderful cultures here. And with this, I'm going to hand this over to our founding director, Dr. Neil Lester.
Thank you, Associate Director Alicia. We indeed are excited that you are here, and we do not take for granted that you could be any place else. And the fact that you're here with us means that we are in for a treat, because this is something we cannot create without you and this particular group at this particular moment in time. Please know that the programs that Project Humanities has been doing for the past 10 years have been framed around this question of, are we losing our humanity? So in response to that, we've created a series of programs that are both virtual and in person, and they're framed around these principles we call Humanity 101. It is not a faith system, but rather a faith in humanity, where we try to practice compassion, empathy, forgiveness, integrity, kindness, respect, and self-reflection. These are both individually as well as organizationally. And the idea is not to get a certificate for practicing this, but being in continual reminding ourselves that we are in fact trying to be better and to do better. And once we know better, the idea is that we will do better. We have been facilitating, as Project Humanities, these critical conversations across communities for 10 years. So we are now into our 11th year, and we thank you for helping us launch our next 10 years of talking, listening, connecting. We have to acknowledge also that tonight's program is an 8-year partnership with PBS. And part of that PBS connection is that they choose the films, and we put together panels and facilitators so that we can have critical conversations that you may not have if you were just watching it on your screen alone or on your screen with family members. This allows for perspectives beyond those. We know that people like to talk about things if they really enjoyed something. So PBS has been wonderfully consistent in not only presenting us with the opportunity to have these conversations sometimes before they air and sometimes after they air, but it builds a more critical audience. So tonight we are in for a treat, because this is a conversation where I suspect that everyone here has something to learn, and we know that you'll get something when you leave that you did not have when you came in. So feel free to chat in the chat, but also recognize that our sense of humanity is fundamentally centered around justice, and this topic could not be more urgent and more necessary and more fundamentally led by a wonderful set of panelists and facilitators. For those who didn't get a chance to see it, however, we would like to show you the trailer, and then I will ask my colleague, Rachel Songaroff, to actually introduce our panelists and facilitators. Thank you again for coming, and let's enjoy this conversation.
हमें सारी जानकारी चाहिए जो इस रास्ते से लेकर के दिक्कतें होती हैं।
वाओ, मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा।
ऑन और ऑफ के लिए बड़ी पहले एक बटन है। हमने अभी तक वो फोन चलाया भी नहीं है। ऐसा समय ही आ गया है कि उसके बगैर हम नहीं मतलब पीछे रह जाएंगे।
मुझसे तो पूछते हैं तो मैं भी पूछ लेती हूँ कि आप कौन से कास्ट के हैं। अब वो कहते हैं मैं ब्राह्मण हूँ तो मैं भी कह देती हूँ मैं भी ब्राह्मण हूँ।
हमारे प्रदेश में दलित औरतों का पत्रकार के रूप में कोई सोच भी नहीं सकता। 14 साल में हमने इस मानसिकता को काफी हद तक बदला है।
क्योंकि मैं उस जगह से हूँ।
माजी अम्मारू है।
मेरे लिए तो बहुत ही रिस्की है।
इन दमंग लोगों ने क्या किया, उसको पत्थर मारकर हत्या कर दी और किसी पर भरोसा नहीं। एक लहरिया ही ऐसे न्याय दिला सकती है।
एक हैरानी वाली बात है कि थाने को पता नहीं, पुलिस स्टेशन को पता नहीं है।
कभी 11 बजे कभी 12 बजे कोई टाइमिंग है नहीं है।
इस जगह पे मैं हूँ, उस जगह पे अगर आप होते तो क्या करते?
पहले अपना काम बाद में देखते।
मुझे तो नहीं लगता है।
संघ शक्ति का युग है। संगठन है, संगठन में शक्ति हो।
जो आपके साथ संगठन है वो देश के भविष्य में किस तरह भागीदारी है?
हर कोई को जानना चाहिए कि हाँ हम पत्रकार थे, एक महिला पत्रकार, और किस तरह की पत्रकारिता हमने की है।
मेरा दिल हौसला देता है मेरे लिए।
Rachel, take it away.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, a wonderful panel with us today. As our facilitator here, we have Nilanjana Bhattacharjee. Dr. Bhattacharjee is affiliated with ASU and its Center of Asian Research and the South Asia Council. Her research focuses on popular music, film, and visual culture from South Asia and its diasporic communities. Her articles and essays appear in journals including Asian Music, Framework, and South Asian History and Culture, as well as in the edited collections Global Bollywood, Travels of Hindi Songs and Dance, South Asian Traditionalisms, Culture Exchange in the 20th Century, and Writing About Screen Media. As a panelist, we have Dr. Indulata Prasad. Dr. Prasad is an assistant professor of women and gender studies in the ASU School of Social Transformation. Her research and scholarship include South Asia, social movements, Dalit studies, oral history, social mapping, gender, caste, and land rights. Her current project uses social mapping alongside ethnography to examine how legal rights to redistributed land has impacted Dalits, former untouchables' lives. She is also a Bluestone Rising 2021 recipient. And finally, we have Madhika Chadha. Madhika Chadha is an associate professor in the School of Journalism at the University of Arizona. Her research focuses on professional and entrepreneurial identity construction, news production in digitally native and local news sites. She examines how the founders of these startups and the journalists who work in them reimagine, reiterate, or redefine their journalistic practices, processes, and output. Before switching to academia, Chadha also worked as a journalist in India for national and international organizations. Excuse me. Welcome to this conversation, everyone. We're so lucky to have you.
So we will start our conversation just by thinking about why we should be thinking about caste at all. If we're in the US and we're far away from South Asia, and perhaps we don't have connections to South Asia, we're not of South Asian descent. So it would seem that these things don't concern us, but the concept of caste is one that is rising in conversation, especially as a result of Pulitzer Prize winning author Isabel Wilkerson's 2020 book, Caste. So it is an explanation of how race and class distinguish from each other. And she does that by looking at 3 different areas. First at Nazi Germany, and also in India, and also the US. And her argument is that if we're looking at race in this country, in the US, we can better understand it if we think about what she says as caste. So she looks at race as something that's much more flexible, much more temporary, and she looks at caste as the hierarchy in which we understand the powers relations between different races. So as she pointed out elsewhere, if race is the language in which we understand sort of power and hierarchy, caste is the actual grammar in which we can understand how race occurs. So I would like to actually now ask Dr. Prashad to respond a little bit to how she looks at caste a bit differently as we might hear from the US. You're muted.
Thank you for that question, Nilanjana. You know, as a South Asian scholar from South Asia, I'm often asked how caste and race is similar, or what is like, how do you explain caste to a non South Asian audience? And one of the things that I often say is that caste is similar to race. However, the way but race is based on skin color predominantly, and caste is based on birth. But it is much more than that. It means the caste defines your occupation. Caste, Dr. Ambedkar, who is the framer of Indian Constitution and a leading Dalit figure, he defines it as caste as a division of laborers. Caste also operates in ways that are beyond that are on the logic of purity and pollution. Now, the way that logic operates is, where it manifests in the space, spatial manifestation. So within the Indian context, you will see Dalit homes that are segregated from the main the main village. You also see caste language that kind of is influenced by caste. So casteist language, gestures. People from South Asia, they can attest to the fact that sometimes, even in urban places, we sometimes reserve certain glasses for people whom we consider are lower caste. And that is the way, like, caste is, the word in the film, she used mansikta. And I would say caste is also a mansikta. How do I translate this? It's an ideology. It's in our DNA kind of situation. So our behavior is casteist. How we move from one caste to another could be deciphered in caste language. So I want to stop there. And I'm like, so there's more to caste than just the more to understanding caste as prejudice. So I just want to say that the manifestation of it, and the film does a good job of kind of showcasing that you see it manifest in everyday life, in people's life, determining where they are in the social hierarchy. And I can talk more about it when I receive questions. Thanks, though.
Could you talk maybe just a little bit more for people who don't know about the term Dalit, and explain how that came along, and also some of the everyday things you mentioned, how people live in separate parts of the community, but what are some of the other places where people encounter caste discrimination in everyday life in India?
So I think it's almost omnipresent, like caste structures life in India, even though we have the rhetoric of, that we are post-caste, that caste no longer exists in modern India. we are a very casteist society, and the film is a testimony to that. In terms of the word Dalit, it is actually it's the word actually means broken down, downtrodden. But we also have to remember that this is a term that Dalits give themselves. It is a very contested term. It is a heterogeneous term. Some people want to use Dalit, some kind of have a contested relationship with the term. So loosely saying, Dalit means former untouchable. So caste, actually within the caste system, there are four layers. The topmost is the knowledge keepers, the Brahmin. The second is the warriors, the Kshatriyas, the Vaishnu, the trader community, and then the one that is doing all the agricultural and other sort of work, that is the Shudra, that is the fourth, and then people who are then placed outside. Now, as we move down the hierarchy, we see a relation of the pollution level increasing. So the topmost level, the non-knowledge keeper, are the ones who are keepers of knowledge and the most pure. And then as we move down that hierarchy, the pollution increases. And then Dalits, they are placed outside the Varna system, and they're deemed untouchable to the point that their shadow is deemed untouchable. They cannot enter, even though they fall under Hindu religion, they cannot enter temples. Like I said, in cities where we think caste does not exist, we have, we must have noticed in our own households where we reserve specific cups for serving people who do not belong to the same caste or religion. So that is the way in which I think caste becomes something that kind of is so intertwined with our everyday lives that it's hard to discern unless you are coming from outside. Like if you're not from the same caste, you can immediately figure out what's the language that is missing. So you can say, okay, this is not my caste. Religious customs. So yes, we can. All of that is yeah. Caste is laced in our society. Yeah.
You're muted.
Oh, one more quick question, Dr. Prasad. Thank you, Dr. Lester. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more, for people who don't know much about the caste system in India, as to how people tell what your caste is. It's not like you're walking around with a sign on it that says. And it was interesting in the trailer. We saw the woman say, they always ask me what caste I am, and I asked, what caste are you? And then she says, I'm the same. And that's how I negotiate that question. So how does that work? How do people know which caste other people are in?
The last name is usually clue to where you are placed in the caste hierarchy. And if someone has a last name like mine, which is very difficult to place, there is a relentless pursuit of knowing your relatives. And I have had exchanges in train, like commuting, in everyday, interactions with people from that part of the world, where they are relentlessly trying to know where you are in the caste hierarchy, with the specific purpose of placing you in the hierarchy and determining how to interact with that person. So yes, that is the last name becomes very important. I remember this incident from during field, I did my field work in rural Bihar. And one of the things that my daughter, who was then very tiny at that time, like in kindergarten, and she said, Mom, everybody in my class is Kumars or Kumaris. And that was like a way of kind of saying, I think it was like trying to take away the caste, like trying to make it general. And yet in that Kumars and Kumaris last name of boys and girls, there was effort to identify where my daughter came from and kind of make those caste connections. So it's very deep and intrinsic, and usually it starts with the last name.
Thanks so much. Dr. Chadha, I was wondering if you could comment just a little bit more generally on the fact that caste is not something that was generally covered in any extensive discussion within the Indian press until relatively recently. Could you tell us a little bit more about why and how it has become more of a discussion lately? Well, so one of the issues with mainstream media in India is it's very urban and very English language oriented. You do have a lot of vernacular language media, but at the same time, the stories that make the headlines, the ones that authorities tend to pay a lot of attention to are the English speaking ones. And of course, some of the more major Hindi language newspapers that are fairly powerful up north, most of them are actually written by upper caste people. And a lot of the reporters belong to upper castes. And in fact, that was something that was mentioned in the movie as well by one of the main protagonists, Meera, where she spoke of how the fact that, usually it's an upper caste male person who is a reporter in the country. And for a Dalit female journalist to be out there starting her own newspaper and writing about issues, that is really path-breaking. And so I think one of the reasons it's being brought up so much is partly because you now have digital native news sites that are bringing up these issues. Research in journalism has always shown that these digital startups by themselves may not seem very impactful, but they are in an indirect way, because what they do is they bring in competition for mainstream media. And so suddenly mainstream media is also talking about issues that are raised by these digital news outlets. So issues that were not normally raised, and as we saw in the movie, in the documentary, they talk about rural issues, simple things like, why are there so many potholes on this road? Why are villages not connected? Why is there no electricity? Why is there dust everywhere around? I mean, one of the reporters spoke about getting dust in her food because of the illegal mining that took place around her village. I think all of these issues that are brought up then, come into the public eye, and mainstream media, therefore, then you see more conversations and more coverage about such issues as compared to before. Titles. No subtitles here for us, if you were asking about those. So we maybe can move on to think a little bit more about journalism deserts. As you were sort of just talking about, there's an urban and rural divide. So you mentioned that people who are now living outside of urban centers are starting to be more represented in reporting, but are these stories that people in urban places want to hear? Do they care? I think they do. I think people do care. One of the issues that's happening, especially with mainstream media in India, is there's a general corporatization, as we like to call it. A lot of them are owned by corporate houses, and therefore a lot of the coverage that you see is very, very influenced by the owners of those media outlets. Within urban India as well, you are seeing more startups, independent, digitally native startups coming up, and our research with them basically showed that they were doing this in some ways because they wanted to preserve what journalism traditionally stands for, which is holding authorities accountable, which is covering the kind of stories that nobody tends to cover, giving voice to the voiceless, all of the journalistic practices and values that that in the US and everywhere else one tends to associate with the profession. And interestingly, even within the movie, the reporter Meera again was talking about how they feel as journalists, they are trying to strengthen the fourth pillar of democracy. They are trying to question authorities. They are trying to report on issues and hold people in power accountable for not delivering on their promises. And I think these are the kind of stories people are interested in. Arguably, once they come up to the forefront, they have led to some grassroots social movements, even at the urban level. So it's not to say that people are not interested. I just think it's more of a way of how does it make its way into mainstream media or into urban media, and then you will find more of an interest. And I think social media, WhatsApp, and all of those platforms are definitely helping promote these kind of issues. Of course, there's the flip side to it, but that's for another conversation. I was about to say, there's a flip side there. It is also the case, of course, that many people in the city still have very real ties, whether direct or indirect, to rural areas because their families are originally from there. So it makes sense that they would take an interest. Dr. Prashad, I know you were also a journalist. Could you speak a little bit about your own experience of looking at how caste was represented or not represented within the news when you were working there?
I don't think we had a discussion of caste. My introduction to caste was in 2005 when I read for the first time Annihilation of Caste. And it speaks about my education and the education system in India, where a critical text that is so critical to understanding caste is not read. This is basic caste 101, Annihilation of Caste. So no, it was not part of the conversation. And like I said, although I like you said that I have deep connections to Bihar. I have fat village. I live in a village when I go back from here. But I was born and brought up in Bengal, neighboring Bengal, and because of the ruling party at that time was the Marxist Party, the Communist Party. Caste was basically on the periphery, but that is not to say that it didn't come up. It came up during those side conversations where you think about why promotion, who is getting those jobs, why you get those raises. But those are very silent and what do you call muted conversations that you get privy to, and because you do not have much context or experience, or but like very much think that, oh, this is not a reality, or it doesn't affect me. That is something that you like. I would say I came into conversation with caste much later, and my conversation has further deepened through my ethnographic fieldwork in rural Bihar, where it is, I think there's a scholar that talks about Bihar as a place where, it's the caste that does that is the determining factor rather than class or money. And he uses that. It's beautifully how he describes, and I think he encapsulates what is missing from scholarship in most fields, journalism included. And you have to know that we have to keep in mind that people who are occupying journalistic positions, they're all coming from upper caste. I do not have the numbers, but it would be interesting to kind of see who are the knowledge, who are the newsmakers of India, what is their caste. The last names are, what do you call, their last names gives us clue that these are primarily upper caste people, mostly male. There has been a feminization of journalism in India, but they are coming from a particular caste, and they are representing the hegemony of caste continues. So because the politics of representation has not been altered, or at least not been dented. And what the film does, which is very powerful, the film actually foregrounds the efforts of these women, is basically speaking grassroots up, the potential of grassroots mobilization. What I have, India is predominantly rural. We forget that. We think of Bangalore, we think of Delhi, we think of Chennai, we think of Mumbai now, but India is predominantly rural. The COVID crisis gave us a sense, visual affirmation of what is rural India and how rural India is upholding urban India. The COVID was a testimony to that. And we do not, the news deserts are real, and it's not like we created them. It's always been the case. And I think social media, the platform, that digital platform that the grassroots are using, are a way to democratize voices from from bottom up. And the fact that women and Dalit women are leading this charge, that's the beautiful aspect of it.
So the women who are at the center of this particular film, so being Dalit women, are Hindu backgrounds, and we have some reference to other sort of marginalized groups in India, including Muslim minorities. And so what's going on in terms of how people understand their position within Indian society as a whole. This is for Dr. Chadha and Dr. Prashad. Just thinking about, like, if we have all these different sort of hierarchies or people, how would Muslims and Christians and Buddhists and Parsis and Sikhs, how would they sort of be worked into how people are thinking about the caste system, or does it just not mesh at all?
You want to answer that, Dr. Chadha?
I can speak to that from personal experience, and this is something I've discussed ever so often. When I was growing up, and I grew up in Mumbai, which is a very cosmopolitan, as urban as they get, we used to, I mean, I know this sounds silly, but we used to call it like the third world cousin of New York City. If you understand New York, you understand Mumbai. We would be so proud of the fact that women could, you know, I was really young when I started working as a reporter, and never was my mother concerned for my safety because, well, we were in Mumbai. Everybody respected each other, caste, religion notwithstanding. And you know, Dr. Prashad pointed to that in urban India, there's never like a discussion about caste. You know, it's more socioeconomic, like it's more economic per se, at least in Mumbai, which is the financial capital. I went to a convent school. My husband is Muslim, and none of these things ever occurred to any of us because we grew up in a secular country. Secularism is actually written in the Indian Constitution. There is no doubt that in the last few years, there has been a drive towards Hindu religion being prioritized over some of the others. And therefore, I mean, facts speak for themselves. Muslim Indian journalists are targeted. The press freedom for India right now is really low. India ranks 142 out of 180. So press freedoms are under fire. Minority journalists feel they're under fire. Females feel they're under fire, and including, I mean, even Khabar Lahariya journalists have reported that their biggest struggle actually is being a woman journalist in Uttar Pradesh, which is the largest state in the country. And so there is no doubt that things have shifted a little bit, and more and more people are fearful. Now, whether, I mean, those are the facts, really. Those speak for themselves. That's been reported upon.
So I would just like to add to that it's basically caste privileged people who do not talk about caste or foreground caste. That's one. And the second is that those who do not foreground caste are basically trying to save themselves from the ignominy of caste-based discrimination. So outing yourself as somebody from a lower caste has real life consequences. And that's what most people do. And the movie talks about, she talks about, you asked me, what is your caste? And so I asked, what is your caste? If you say you're upper caste, I'm also upper caste. So that's a very subversive way of doing things. And it's there. The other point is that caste is not just restricted to Hinduism. It's kind of managed to inflict every other religion that's practiced in there. At least I can speak to Christianity and Islam being affected by caste. So yeah, that's to answer your question. It's like this is not, we've managed to pollute. It's there everywhere, and the discrimination is like, even if you are somebody who are practicing a non-discriminatory religion, theoretically, practice doesn't, like the praxis of it has the lexicon of caste embedded in it. So yeah.
I was hoping we could think a little bit more about the shift to digital news media. And I know that Dr. Chadha spends a lot of time thinking about this, but some of the most memorable scenes from the film for me were thinking about the women as they were sort of trying to figure out their first mobile phones and were scared of breaking them, or sort of, in some cases, told that they shouldn't actually touch them or they would break them. And so they were looking at these new things. cell phones are pretty ubiquitous, somewhat because infrastructure hasn't allowed everyone to actually have a landline or get one quickly enough. At the same time, just thinking about how it opens up things. I mean, you said you would talk about WhatsApp on a different day, but I know for a fact that many people get their news via that sort of outlet, whether it's good or bad, and that of course is an international phenomenon. So just thinking about the digital media landscape, do you think that this is something that will ultimately help more women get involved in journalism, or do you see the same kinds of barriers and harassment and discrimination being enacted within the digital media scape as well? And it's for both of you, of course.
Well, great question. So for starters, within the movie, we already saw women using cell phones to go and get the kind of stories that they wouldn't have gotten under normal, and by normal circumstances, I mean, if they were part of mainstream media. I mean, there were scenes in the movie where the female journalists are holding their cell phones, but they are in a crowd of male camera people. And as a female journalist who also worked with, who was surrounded by male camera people, let me tell you, it's like a gender fight as well as a story fight. You know, you're trying to get the facts, and at the same time, you're trying to make your way in. And you see that in the documentary. You see that in the trailer as well, where, you know, she's trying to brush off somebody while she's trying to film the story. I think digital media, especially cell phones. So as you mentioned, the thing about India is that internet penetration is somewhere about 40–50%, but cell phone penetration is almost 70 to 80, right? And so, so definitely news via cell phones is getting to people, information is getting to people. That is why we also have that battle with disinformation and rumors, and often leading to some really disastrous consequences. In this instance, I think cell phones, digital media have definitely lowered the threshold for anybody to come in and report on the news. Khabar Lahariya exists because cell phones allowed them to go out and produce news, to do their reporting. They didn't have to rely on expensive cameras. They didn't have to rely on you know, male expertise to teach them how to work with the camera. But even with cell phones, you saw one of the protagonists who was like, I mean, she was really shaky at first because she didn't know which button to press to record the video, to, you know, how to do that. And I think that's just an indication of how technology, like women in India don't have access to technology. At the start of the documentary was this really interesting line where the woman said, there's a cell phone at home, but I'm afraid to touch it in case I ruin it. You know, but I don't think a man ever thinks that. You know, I mean, this cell phone probably belongs to the man. So I think, to answer your question, digital media has definitely opened more doors. And it's definitely allowed more people to do the kind of reporting that this documentary highlights, you know, by the very people that mainstream media or traditional folks wouldn't have allowed in. You know, for a Dalit journalist to go in and ask a cop or ask a politician questions about, well, why have you not delivered on your promises? In some ways, the cell phone was power. They were recording on the cell phone, and the cell phone was on, and then the men were answering questions. And so that's definitely the more optimistic, you know, approach to saying that technology would help.
I also want to add that it takes care of literacy, you know, the written language, because you're recording. Because of the historic injustice of keeping knowledge away from Dalits. This is the context in which, you know, so I think in the laws of Manu that kind of undergirds what do you call the caste system, if you even hear the scriptures, I think you should lead should be poured in the ears of the Shudra. So that is the kind of ways in which culturally, like, how do you, like, you take away culture from the people. So imagine Dalits with low rates of low rates of literacy, cell phones, or at least a digital medium, becomes a way of expressing what they see, what they want to report on. So it really is, it just takes off the limitation of literacy, or literacy is expressed in some other ways. Oftentimes I'm drawing on my fieldwork again. I asked the women to draw their spaces, and the amount of fun that upper caste men made. And their rebuttal is that, you know what, we did not do this. If we can do backbreaking labor, this is intellectual labor, and certainly we can master that, and they did. So there is a critique here of, what are the challenges and how technology can help overcome them. And in this case, I think women with cell phones is a great empowering asset. And with a low, of course, the lead characters have, they were married early on, but then they made it their business to kind of make sure that they had their degrees, with Mira having 2 degrees. And so it was just an empowering moment. I also wanted to your earlier question, that something I wanted to get back to, and was the issue of how caste remains in place. I found it interesting that the film opened with a rape account. And it was stunning to me. As a matter of fact, she said, I was raped on 16th, I was raped on 18th, 19th, 2nd, 3rd, and 10th. And then Mira asks which month, and she says January. And rape is the way to exercise dominance in Dalit communities. Rape is the highest form of atrocity committed on Dalit women. And I felt like that was one way of conveying how caste is always gendered. It is on the bodies of Dalit women. And so that commentary, that undercurrent, which I felt like, just the narrative is like they came on this date, which month, January, I felt was a very powerful way of opening, or at least conveying something without actually a commentary or something like that. So that was in my mind. I had to kind of put it somewhere before it went away. Yeah.
That scene was devastating, just to watch the interview, and to also see the sort of lackadaisical, casual way in which the police inspector says, oh, we don't know anything about that. And it's like, we came to you this many times telling you about this. How is this not possible? And he does it on camera. It's quite amazing, but that you're right. It illustrates the problem in very stark terms at the very start of the film. So one of the things also that was a powerful scene for me in the movie, not really strictly about technology, but it does relate in terms of who controls the technology in the home, was the degree to which these women are negotiating barriers both outside the home, but also within the home, within their families, whether it is their husbands or other family members who are expecting them to have certain things done by the end of the day. Perhaps they've been working on a story, they've been out. How do you see these women's involvement in journalism changing or not changing the gender dynamics within these households that were in the film?
So the one thing that struck me in the movie was how every single female reporter came back after a long day at work and then went straight to the kitchen to make the meal for the night. Every single one of them. I think such a negotiation with the male members, that interaction between Mira and her husband, where the husband says that I would do the household work first because that's the focus, even though Mira's friend points out that her salary runs the house, or that it's important to it. At the same time, I think those are really difficult relationships at this point. I don't think we're anywhere close to negotiating those gendered roles so far. It's almost as if I've sometimes noticed that I wonder if these women work harder to fulfill the gendered role just so then they get the independence to do the reporting. It's almost as if, well, I did I did the household work, I did this, I did that. This is something I'm doing for myself. So it's like the negotiation is fulfilling that role that is expected of them, and then sort of negotiating for the freedom to do journalism. I don't think we're anywhere close to getting over that yet.
To me, it's also interesting to think about the fact that these women, most of them have had very sort of local experiences in terms of their maybe being in their village or their immediate neighborhood and never really having necessarily had the money probably or the time to venture out. So they're going to all these different areas where their husbands may never have gone. And I just love that. That was, it was really nice to see women sort of going out there and seeing things.
You know, I just want to kind of point out that we tend to see gender as a determining lens here. For me, it was a commentary on how Dalit women have occupied multiple marginal positions. The navigation of the home space is there for even middle and upper caste women, more so, because we forget that Dalit women enjoy much more freedom, physical freedom to move outside the house than caste women. The kind of restrictions that caste women have to face, that is not there for Dalit women.
So because of work and domestic work and other kinds of jobs that they take?
Yeah, the field and the house, it's a fluid boundary because they are laborers, they're working out, they have much more freedom. However, and when you come to the caste angle or the upper caste, these are the same expectations. I'm thinking about married upper caste women who have to do to when they come. It's a scene. What I'm trying to kind of put out here is that this is a scene that can play out in any Indian women context. Where I would run with this is that it shows how difficult, how deeply steeped patriarchy is, how caste operates through the logic of patriarchy, and Dalit women are occupying multiple marginalized positions. That being said, I also feel like, you know, from the beginning, from where he said he was a younger looking husband to the place where he's making the food towards the end, to me, that was change, social change, because to expect change, like I feel like the process of social change, especially in aspects of patriarchy and casteism, it is a slow process, a tedious process. And if one follows the Mira's husband at the beginning to where they're all sitting and having their food, it just seems like there has been some mellowing of him, from him sitting on the chair and drinking his tea to coming on the floor and having food. So I'm just saying that gender is important, but we need to not see that as exclusive to this category, but overall Indian society. In fact, patriarchy and casteism works together to ensure women's oppression. So while one is the control of sexuality by the upper caste, and then also trying to assert control of sexuality of the lower caste. So I'm just trying to say that it's complicated, and I think reading it as simply from a gendered perspective might be a disservice in this context, because she was able to complete her degrees. There's a lot of negotiation and back and forth, and I'm wondering how that would play out in upper caste context, or even, you know, what are the circles that upper caste community women, you know, our caste gives us privilege when we move. Caste is inscribed on our bodies. And so upper caste journalists covering versus, you know, I think about my journalism days and the privileges that I enjoyed in coverage of a story vis-a-vis the women who are walking to the places. They're not escorted. They do not have camera per person to kind of help them. They're living in the same locality. So there's no respite that you can move out of the community. It's deeply embedded in the community. So I just feel like, you know, in the Indian context, it would be a disservice to see caste as gender as separate from caste. And I think both need to see, because they're in trying to highlight these gender differences, we forget to see the other, like, you know, there are a lot of these social restrictions on women are upper caste restrictions. Right. And we use that lens to judge Dalit women. And I think we need to recognize that that does a great disservice in trying to understand their struggle.
That's such a good point. It's so important. And I think it also points to the fact that the mainstream representation of women's issues in India regularly excludes the experiences of adult women. So for me, at least, I'm not used to thinking about women because I've been around upper caste communities and seen them represented in the media. It's like women can't run around and do things. And so I was just happy to see anybody run around and do things. I was like, oh, go. But as you're pointing out, they've always had the agency to do that as a result of their caste identity. So that's a fantastic point. Thank you so much.
There is a comment there that says there are many who dismiss these issues as rural problem, but not a city problem. Thoughts on that? And maybe I know Dr. Bhattacharya, you're one of those people who deals. So maybe you could comment to or just so taking a comment from here because I know we want to hear from you too.
So wait, what do you want me to comment on exactly?
Oh no, there are comments here which I think.
Oh, there are comments here. Yes. Yeah. I just wanted to say one thing before I forgot it, because in just touching base earlier this week, I think it was you, Dr. Chether, who brought up the fact that one of the women, when she comes home, she is doing everything in the house, but then she tells her daughter, right? Was it you, Dr. Prashad? She's passing on, you're responsible for everything in the house. I just wanted to say that. Any comments on that? And then we'll move on to the comments here.
No, go ahead, please.
Sorry, go on.
No, you go ahead, please.
No, I had made that point, and I looked at that scene again, and the husband's kind of sitting there. But yes, I think she did address that to the daughter. And in the chat, I'm noticing, as someone, Dr. Prashad talked about, gender and gendered roles, and second, and also the patriarchy in general, and how upper caste women are equally, subjected or face these kind of issues. And then somebody in the chat said it's called the second shift in the US, where, women go out, do their jobs, and then come back and still have to do all of the household chores. So clearly, I wonder if that scene is actually a reminder to women that we should be cognizant of what we're passing on to our daughters, that maybe we shouldn't be asking. And I do know that conversations like this are happening. And I do know that, there are parents who are saying, teach your sons. And so I know change is happening. So it's not to say that it's not. I definitely know we're moving along from there, but just that it was in the movie was interesting to me.
Yes. The fact that we internalize, like, no matter how, we want to be in critical relationship, but it kind of shows, despite all that, we are still navigating social, the milieu, which is very steeped in casteism, patriarchy, sexism, and other stuff. Yeah.
I wanted to address this question that Rachel had asked, where there's a sense that caste is much more something that happens outside in the rural areas, but in the city, people are more modern and they don't think about these things as much. How does that work? Do you see it in the film, or do you see it in outside mostly, or?
This film is primarily talking about a rural hinterland, state in India that sends the most number of political representatives, determining who gets to sit in the center. It is also one of the places where the highest atrocities against Dalit Adivasis are committed. But to those who feel like caste does not exist in cities, I would ask them, who collects the garbage? What is your relationship to the garbage person? Who cleans the city? Where do they stay? Do you know where they are? They are invisible workers. They're invisible, essential workers that are responsible for the upkeep of the city. And the pandemic, in the pandemic means I've had stories where people who were they were pressed into service and yet were not given the bare minimum protection to take care of themselves. if it's hard for me to say, it's like, have you not opened your window and seen who does your chores? Where are they coming from? Where is this influx of people coming? People are not coming out of the ground. They're coming from somewhere. Where are they coming? Why are they coming? I had this conversation with engineering student in a premier engineering student. And I'm like, did you not go to the railway station? Did you not see who, like, how could you not have those questions? Are you determined not to see, or you're determined not to ask those questions? Like, that's what I asked them. It's like, just begin with the garbage person. Who is the person who collects the garbage? How do people refer to them? Do you touch them? How do you hand your garbage? It's basically handed in a way that you don't touch the hand. The hand shouldn't touch. So it's discreet. There are many families, mine included, that had separate cups for it. It is a practice that we learned to discontinue, but that was there in the beginning. I remember those cups, and that's one of the markers of like, we practice untouchability, knowingly or unknowingly, despite being committed to radical ideas. So just being secular doesn't mean that we cannot be practicing casteism. So I just want to say it's complicated and it's omnipresent. Like something at the strange station, I remember, I saw this person who was giving money, and he dropped the money in the palm. The shopkeeper gave change, and the change was given in a way so that it was dropped. It wasn't like in the palm. And there were possibility of falling, the coins falling. And so I asked my father, is like, why did he do that? Why did he not just place it? And he said, maybe he must be an upper caste afraid of pollution. So that's the memory I have in terms of a very crowded railway station where a brief exchange of money taking place, like the change was being returned. Yeah.
So, sorry, I just want to very quickly add to that. Growing up in an urban place as I did, I of course was also under the notion that caste is just a rural thing. We don't see that around us, until I was checked for my privilege, because caste only doesn't matter to people who are upper caste. There are inherent privileges that come with it that we just don't realize. It might be in the way we move around in society. It could be several things, right? I mean, but you only have to go to northern India, where caste is so central, whether it's for political or social issues, and I think that's when you realize just how central and how influential caste is in every aspect of life. I went for a story to Rajasthan, which is a mega tourist spot, but the caste system there, I mean, you have the upper caste men wearing earrings, and that sort of distinguished who they were, just based on their wear, based on the ornaments that they had. And so, yeah, maybe caste doesn't matter to them, but they're in a privileged position. I think whoever says caste doesn't matter in India must first check for their own privilege before they make that comment.
I was amazed to find out about tiffin services that would deliver food cooked by the right hands to workers in office buildings, because there was concern that they wouldn't be able to find food that had been made in the clean and pure way by clean and pure hands. And so you have to specially arrange for that to happen to eat anything. And that blew my mind. I had no idea the tiffin service was connected to that, but I understand that this is something also that has made its way to the United States as well, and many places where we have a large community of people who are from South Asia. So we can talk more about that at some point. But I think getting back to the films, I think Dr. Lester had asked, how are these people supporting themselves, and how is it that they got to walk around on the beach in Sri Lanka? Because that's nowhere near Uttar Pradesh. It's a really lovely thing that they, how were they there? How did they take the plane over there? Like, who was funding that? Do we have a sense of how they did that?
No, I have I'm just thinking it's the transition to the digital platform that may have allowed for an increase in what do you call revenue. I haven't. The film doesn't give a lot of background about the journey for the newspaper. It's primarily documents the transition from the newspaper to the print to the digital what do you call it, move. But we do not have a sense of the newspaper, the struggles there. And my assumption, and this is purely an assumption, that it's the digital medium that is allowing for the multiplication of revenues. And also, I think support that might have come from the different recognition that is happening for this news outlet. So I wouldn't know much, but yeah, it was refreshing that they could do that, that they could step out of Uttar Pradesh, and it was a very moving scene. It was very powerful scene. And more part of them kind of situation. Like I'm glad they were able to do what they were doing. Yes.
My understanding is that, Dr. Prasad is right. They did have a weekly newspaper, so I'm assuming they probably charged a minimal price for it. I think some of it, they definitely do pay their reporters. I just don't know how much, and I think some of it is possibly notice in the movie they also talk about the same concerns when they are transferring to digital. They're talking about audience clicks, they're talking about how many people are responding to what is posted on social media. They started they launched their own programs, sort of with a reporter talking into the camera and sort of giving coverage. So I think there's definitely revenue coming in from that. So they've diversified revenue streams. I'm sure some of it is also money from the print paper that they give out every week. I'm not very sure about whether they're getting any money from nonprofits based on the recognition that they've received thus far. It's not very clear in the documentary. The documentary does not address it does not address the revenue model of this newspaper for sure. And yes, that was a good question, because their office trip was up in Kashmir, so which is really nice. And I was thinking the same thing. Wow, that's nice that they are able to afford these sort of team building trips with with their entire group. I think of about 40 women.
I did go to their website, and they have an ethical statement out there. I think in terms of sponsorship, they kind of put out that we are picky about it. And you should also be. So there are ethical statements there, and it seems like how can we move about this space in the most ethical manner possible? In a time when we are seeing journalists being fired, news organizations closing, more corporatization, and more organizations having to toe a particular line of coverage. I just feel like they're doing something right. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I think it's important to know, if you're outside India, that people in India actually still very much read the paper in paper form. It is a thing. You see people reading physical papers. It's not quite as digital heavy as things are here. Now, people also watch the news incessantly, 24-hour news channels in various languages. Any language that you'd like, you can find it. So Dr. Lester's question about how the newspaper has managed to keep on going, it was addressing what you were talking about, Dr. Prasad, but it is actually the case. I mean, here as well, within journalism, as you both well know, it's very, very difficult for independent journalism to survive. And so we have fewer and fewer local perspectives that are making their way, even within the United States, to all of our local audiences everywhere, readers. So within India, you have this added threat of the government or other organizations trying to shut you down. So what do you think has allowed these women to continue to do what they have done? How are they different than so many other organizations that seem to have faltered?
I have a theory, sort of directly answering the question that's in chat. That it's surprising that the newspaper has been allowed to function, even though they're challenging authorities. And my argument is, to some extent, because they're doing very basic grassroots ground reporting, and the authorities aren't threatened yet. When the authorities, and here's what I mean, I don't for a second imply that they are not challenging authorities enough. I think they're doing they're asking them questions, they're doing their reporting, they're doing everything that they're meant to be doing, but at some level, the authorities are thinking about them as a rural grassroots newspaper and just focused on those areas. You see a lot of harassment of national level journalists by the government. For example, recently there was a Washington Post columnist who was prevented from leaving the country for a talk that she was going to give in the UK. You have seen national editors being targeted by the government, and usually what they tend to do is they tend to send income tax officials over and start asking them for their financial reports, and then the next thing you know, you are caught up in just giving answers, giving documentation. Twitter heads have been called into court. Social media, I mean, free speech in general, right, is under threat. So in some ways, yes, it is great that these folks haven't been shut down. And I think that's partly because at some level, they're still focusing on, you haven't built the roads, you haven't, arrested the perpetrators. They're pointing to the very things that that the government should be doing. So I feel to some extent the government doesn't feel threatened. Yes, being held accountable, but not threatened.
Yeah, I was thinking about that issue of safety, particularly because we see Gauri Lankesh, a journalist from Bangalore, a female journalist who was assassinated as a result of her own work. That is actually in the movie as well, right? They're looking at that story and obviously thinking, are we going to be subject to the same kind of danger as a result of the work that we're doing? It's a real threat. And of course, people are also harassed, doxxed, all sorts of things that with SWAT teams sent to their house. If they're online, if they have any kind of presence. And it's usually the case also within the case of South Asian journalists that there are many people from India and other countries all over the world who are also joining in these networks of harassing and going after people because of things like Twitter and other kinds of WhatsApp forwards. It's very easy for these kinds of campaigns to harass particular people to be organized nationally and internationally. So I just wanted to bring that up. It's interesting though, the stories, as you're saying, they're too local to make too much of a difference to make anyone nervous.
My reading would be is that it's a grassroots organization. They're from the community, they're using local language. And so their reporting is journalism, it's grassroots journalism. The community says that we can only trust Khabar Lahariya. I've done ethnographic work and my only sense of security came from the community. There's no other security that can. So being embedded in the community vested in seeing the stories told, the community giving them the papers. This is a grassroots, I would read it as a grassroots reaction, or and we may talk about 40 women, but the 40 women are not, they're rooted in communities. They are vested in telling their stories. And they are telling those stories in language that they can understand, not English, not Hindi, but local Bundelkhandi, Bhojpuri, like they are there in Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh. But my take is that it's not the journalism that we do in cities where you go in there and you're like, oh, you will get this story, you'll get that story. And it's not a detached story where you do one story today and you're assigned another story today. Those stories are stories embedded in communities, covered by women who are in those communities. And there is community investment, and there is something to say about that kind of reporting, that kind of grassroots journalism. Their emphasis, there is threat, and I think anybody who underplays that journalism is a very threatened, what do you call it? It's endangered, like endangered species. I feel like it's an endangered profession. And it is vital for, the grassroots support is vital. I think we do not recognize that sometimes we think we are powerful, journalists are powerful, but sometimes we need to tell people that, you know what, we need to hear the truth, the fact. And sometimes even powerful people or people who appear as powerful just because they have a camera and a platform to voice, they too need support. And the grassroots then becomes very instrumental. That's where that's how I'm reading it, is that the only reason would be the ability to forge the inter-community connections. While this is being posited as a Dalit organization, it is it has a diverse group of caste in there. There is and religious minorities in there. So there is diversity in that community. We are trying to we need to be very aware of that. And that diverse group is located in diverse communities. So the language plays important. The fact that the community is vested in getting their stories told, that was important. I know from my ethnographic experience in rural Bihar is people want their stories to be heard. They want to know. It is not a story of the dominant narratives of any time Dalit-related story that makes news. This is a very positive news, by the way. The Oscar for Khabar Lahariya is rape, murder, something that is negative and horrific that being done by the community. We do not allow for positive stories of resistance, of something that breaks these shackles. And we need more of those stories. And it's not that they're not there. It's just that we haven't found them and we haven't had the capacity to tell those stories. And I think these women are doing that by going there. And, I love the way she said, she's interviewing this nationalist, the person who is a cow protection group. And she asked a very poignant question, which I haven't seen any journalist ask that. It's like, what is your vision of India? And that gets to the heart of it, because we are right now in the midst of, how do we imagine this country? Do I have a place in this country? What is the kind of India that you imagine? And it's telling, the answers are telling. And so I feel like it's more to do with where they're coming from, how they're situated, what is the medium of narration. There is a subversiveness here that needs to be recognized. Dalit survival, Dalit resistance does not register in upper caste theories of social movements, or even, you don't see them as agents or agents of change. And here they.
How does this international audience that's going to come to them through film festivals and international distribution as a result of the Oscar nomination, how is that going to change things for the group? Do you have a sense? Can't read the future, but I think all of us are wondering.
No, I want to be very hopeful for them. Oscar is like the highest, but they have been recognized in the past. Oscar is further putting them in the limelight. Oscar brings them to the conversation in the US. So yes, that's the conversation starter. But I'm very hopeful. I feel like these are journalists who are very acutely aware of their situation. They're very acutely aware of the dangers they face. And, I think, and they're also I feel like I want to be hopeful for them. I feel like they are navigating a difficult terrain, but it's not that they haven't been here. This is something that has been recognized. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out, but I actually feel like they have a lot of resilience, of the amount of thought, just the way they carried out the stories, the planning of the stories. This is what we did in journalism, right? You plan your stories, you ask your questions, you sharpen your questions. You want to, even as a female, I remember sharpening my questions to be getting what I want without offending, like least offending questions. It's a very difficult task, and they're doing all that and more. So I want to be very hopeful for them.
There were 3 points that I wanted to make. One, Dr. Prashad, I absolutely agree with you. I think a lot of it is their narrative, the way they approach very sensitive issues. You know, they ask very tough questions very sensitively. They are very aware of the narrative. They also highlight how they're all about reporting the facts, the news, the issues as they happen. They don't try to sensationalize it. They don't try to, sort of work in intimate, like, they spoke to the murdered woman's husband, but, I mean, she stopped recording after a while and tried to, give him some words of consolation. So clearly they approach things very differently. Secondly, this movie has not been showed in India, and they haven't aired it there. And in fact, there's a lot of conversation amongst Indian journalists regarding why this Oscar-nominated documentary has not been aired in the country. And why is it that it's been doing the rounds in the West, but not in India? And there's speculation, but essentially that's kind of how it still managed to remain under the radar, because it hasn't been aired openly in the country just yet. And thirdly, the Khabar Lahariya itself came up with a statement about the documentary, in which they basically said, the documentary shows a time in their journey. Their 20-year journey is so much more than that. It focuses on one aspect. They wanted to highlight that the coverage of issues and events, especially certain political stories, showed that they were maybe focusing on one story, but they were actually focusing on a lot, and their reporting was more holistic. So I think in some ways there's been some critique of how Khabar Lahariya was depicted in the documentary by the folks themselves. And that statement is up on their website. It's in English, actually, and so folks who are here can read that statement for themselves and hear the explanation. But at the same time, I know that the organization is pleased with their work being highlighted and them getting the recognition at this high level. So that's the context for what does it mean for the organization moving forward. Actually, I would like to know what happens if they air this film in India. I want to see the reaction to that.
That would, yeah, I think all of us are waiting for that. I had one question for you, Dr. Chadha, because you are a professor of journalism. None of these women have been to journalism school, as far as I can tell. Obviously they're good at what they do, but do you sense that the skills that journalists have to develop in India to do the kind of work that is needed, are those skills essentially different than what we are training journalism students at Cronkite or at the University of Arizona to do?
Actually, no. And interestingly, what I saw with the way these women were doing journalism is exactly the kind of journalism we want the students here to do, which is hold authorities accountable. Just because somebody is powerful does not mean that you shouldn't be asking pressing questions. These women are fearless. They don't let anything hold them back, not their gender, not their caste. The stories are more important. They're giving voices to the voiceless. They highlight the grassroots narratives that are often lost in mainstream media. There was a bit in the documentary where this male correspondent was telling the woman, how to ask questions. And she was like, I'm doing just like, I think she was a little bit respectful, but also like, I'm doing just fine, thanks. I mean, I'm going to ask them the way I asked them. That was my take on it. And in some ways, that's what we want to teach our students here. We want them to do all of these things and at the same time be fearless in the pursuit of the truth of what is important, what is in the public interest. And these women do that without sensationalizing anything, without really preying on somebody's grief. They're very sensitive and at the same time true to what the narrative should be. And to be able to strike that balance, I don't know, maybe it's a good thing they didn't go to journalism school in India. because they're bringing their own stamp to it, and if it isn't broken, don't fix it.
I hope you don't mind my putting you on the spot there. So
no, that is exactly the kind of question I want to ask. I was hoping you'd ask me that.
Great. So Dr. Lester had a great question here. Are there powerful lines or images that remain with you after the film ends? For me, just quickly, the scene in which they're being able to ask about the miner who died and bring that story into the consciousness of everyone who tried to bury it. That was just a remarkable scene.
For me, I can hear her when she says, "Mera dil hausla deta hai," meaning that my heart gives me courage. And I know for many women, or at least the labor of love, that's where you get, that is what driving them and helping them navigate a very difficult terrain, a violent terrain. So it just stays with me when she says that. It has a way of tugging at you and letting you know what is it that is driving these. I don't want to call them fearless. I don't want to call them, like, I don't want to glorify them, but I do want to honor their sensitivity, their persistence, the relentless pursuit. So, that's where I'm like, I'm very indebted for the hope that they offer. And when everything is dark, where do you look for? Inside. So, dil hausla deta, yeah.
But for me, it is the scenes that Dr. Lester mentioned, which is, where she talks about how journalism can really uphold, like, the fourth pillar of democracy, how if we can be a channel for truth and holding people accountable, we should be doing that. So really staying true to journalism. And my favorite one, of course, is when the two of them are going to interview the politician. And the fearless illegal mining reporters is looking at the other one and saying, he hasn't delivered anything in his own village. They don't have electricity and they have really bad roads. And here he is like, we should be asking him these questions. That to me was like, you've got your mind in the right place. You're asking the right questions. You go, girl.
Were the translations accurate?
I didn't go for the translations.
Okay.
I didn't go for that because
okay.
To understand.
Right.
But that's a good question. No, I just watched I just soaked the film.
Okay. All right. Well, I know for those who don't speak the language, that sometimes things can get lost in translation. And in order to get the real sense, I guess this was really intended for an English speaking audience. Mm-hmm. They were just trying to give you the essence, but I just wondered if any of you picked up on any nuances that were slightly missed if you did watch the captions there.
So I think her interaction with the police officer, where she was more, and this is, I'm going on, my watching the interaction, because a question that I have, like, how does a journalist ask questions? So the body language, the way the questions were being asked. But then again, I have to remember the context in which these questions are asked. So I don't know, but it could have, that could be a point where, and even when they were navigating, the mansplaining and, close the camera, I am telling you news, so I don't know where they might have done it, but I think it's difficult to capture what's happening in words. So, but I have to tell you, I did not, I wasn't reading the
Okay.
No.
Well, I'll have to admit I was, okay?
I think
And I just wanted to know from the inside if I was getting true picture and the accurate picture, because I know things can get lost in translation.
I think Dr. There are some things that were lost, but I just wanted to point to Dr. Prashad's point earlier that the local dialect and language, Bhojpuri, is really foregrounded in a way that many people in North India would recognize as being very particular and not the way that they themselves speak. So that is interesting. It's not a standard Hindi.
No, and it's not Bhojpuri also.
Right. I would understand more of that.
Yeah, no, so even in my field work, as I navigate from my village to my village of research, language, dialect changes and struct changes. And I have had people whom I spent 1 year with them, and they said I didn't understand you for a year. And then you are like, what was I doing? So yeah, those are real challenges. And I thought I was speaking their language. So there you go.
Well, this was certainly an enlightening and full conversation, and I appreciate the fact that you were able to tease out the nuances, both inside as an insider, but also as a person who can look at this objectively. So we cannot thank you enough. As I said, PBS chooses the films for us, and the range of films that they choose is actually quite remarkable, and the quality is actually pretty consistent. Surprise, surprise. But no, they are really, really interested in going into places that few people will go into and introducing the world to topics that we don't always think about or think deeply about. So we thank the panelists and the facilitators. So a round of applause for your wonderful, wonderful conversation tonight. I hope that if we see this again, we'll see things differently than we saw it the first time, but you expressed to us why this is important and why it should matter to us. So thanks for contextualizing that at the very beginning. I remind people as we move into the last few minutes that we do have a feedback form that we would appreciate your filling out and completing, because we do want your feedback. We thank you all who have attended. Again, we don't take it for granted that you could be someplace else. There is the tinyurl.com WWF22. But we also want you to take that pledge. Associate Director Alicia pointed that out at the very beginning, but the pledge is only if you are committed to those principles. And as we pointed out tonight, we connect those principles not with a faith system in particular, but rather with justice and faith in humanity. And I think that theme of humanity came up over and over again. We also invite you to continue to follow us. I think we have about 4 more programs before the semester ends as we move into the last few weeks of the spring semester. And the topics range from soul food and superheroes to missing and murdered Indigenous women and Two Spirits. So we have done and are doing things that many aren't and won't do, and we bring experts to guide us on into those conversations. So Project Humanities is here doing a little TLC, talking, listening, and connecting. And we thank you all so much for joining us tonight. And as my friend David Hemfield of the Black Theater Troupe says, as he signs off at the end of a production, if you really enjoyed this conversation, please go talk about it. Tell somebody about what we learned and what we can do with what we've learned. But if you didn't get anything out of it, just keep your mouth, your lips sealed, and don't say anything. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And we'll ask our team to just wait on for another 5 minutes, or not 5 minutes, another couple of minutes, as we have some of our students who may be in the audience join us for the final picture. So good evening, good night, good day. Yes. And as we have people exit, thank you, thank you, thank you. And we are at 7:30.
Yeah, in terms of, I don't see that. of our.
Was everybody there? Okay. I thought I saw Nandini there. Was Nandini not there tonight?
She was here, but I think she's left since.
Okay, Narav was there. So everybody was there and we got the picture earlier then.
Yes,